Thailand created a 5-year visa for people who earn abroad and want to stay.
And it was designed so that nobody can actually live there.
Things you've never seen, now revealed.
This is destinations in detail.
Last time we ended on an open question. At what exact moment does a visitor become a resident? We showed an island where the shop signs changed alphabet, not because more people had arrived, but because a much smaller group had stopped leaving. What was missing was the other half of the story. What the country did about it. The answer arrived in 2024. A new visa, valid for 5 years, tailored to people who work remotely and want to spend long stretches there. At first glance, it looks like the simplest thing in the world. The country acknowledged that these people exist and built them a door. But read the rule all the way through and you find the door has a catch. And that catch is the subject of this episode.
It is worth understanding the situation this visa is answering because it is confusing and it exists everywhere. There is now a large population of people who live in one place and are paid from another. They are not tourists because they stay for months. They are not immigrants in the classical sense because they are not competing for local jobs. And they are not local workers because they hold no local contract and pay no local payroll. Before this visa, those people lived in a gray zone, entering on a tourist stamp, leaving the country every couple of months purely to get the passport stamped again, existing in a kind of permanent internship. The slang for it is a visa run. It is not illegal, but it is fragile. It depends on the mood of the officer at the border, and it can end at any moment.
The mechanism of the new visa is simpler than it sounds, and it explains everything that follows. You are granted an authorization valid for 5 years. But that validity is not how long you may stay. It is how long the authorization is good for entering. Each entry gives you up to 180 days in the country. If you want to stretch it, you may extend once for another 180. After that, there is no third extension. You must leave the country and then you may enter again, and the clock resets. Look at the shape of that. The document lasts 5 years, but no single stay lasts more than a year. A person spends half a decade authorized and never spends one whole year inside. It is a long-term permission built entirely out of departures.
Now the numbers, and they show the demand was real. The visa launched in July 2024, and within roughly a year, had passed 35,000 applications. To qualify, an applicant must be 20 or older, show that their income comes from outside Thailand, employment, contract, or business abroad, and present a balance of 500,000 baht, which must have been sitting in the account for at least 90 consecutive days before applying. The fee varies with the country of residence, and there is a detail that tends to slip past. The document grants no right to work for a Thai employer, and it opens no path to permanent residency. It authorizes being there. It does not authorize belonging.
Hold the question that comes next because it is the heart of this episode. If the country wanted to organize the people who were staying, why build a document that forces those people to leave every so often instead of simply letting them stay?
Because staying has consequences neither side particularly wants to discuss. On the person's side, almost every tax system in the world draws a line separating those passing through from those who belong, and in most jurisdictions that line sits at exactly 183 days inside a year. One day beyond it, and a person may become a tax resident of that country with everything that implies for their own tax affairs. On the country's side, a resident has schools, a place in the clinic queue, a mayor, and eventually a vote. A long-stay visitor has spending, and none of that. The 180-day limit is not a round number picked at random. It is the boundary that keeps a person present and not resident, useful, and with no account to settle.
And from the inside, this takes a very concrete shape, familiar to anyone living it. It is a calendar on the wall with a date circled. It is a plane ticket bought not because anybody wants a trip, but because the clock is running out. Usually to a neighboring country, 3 days, a modest hotel, and back. It is the child in an international school whose friends leave every semester. It is the couple who have already chosen their baker, their doctor, and their mechanic in that neighborhood, and who still keep a suitcase half-packed all year round. People who live near them notice something curious. They often know the neighborhood better than longtime residents do, and on paper they remain people who are passing through. And it is the passport with stamp on top of stamp, almost always from the same border post, always only a few months apart, in somebody else's drawer that would be a souvenir of traveling. Here it is something else. It is the record of a clock, and the person turning those pages can count their own life by it.
And here the story refuses the villain, because two truths are usually told as one. First, the come-and-go design is neither cruelty nor a trap. It solves a real problem for a country that needs to welcome spending without taking on a long-term commitment to people who do not contribute locally. And it is far more generous and far safer than the gray zone that existed before it. Second, that same design pushes into informality precisely the parts of life that most need formality. School enrollment, health cover, a long lease, a loan, none of those were built for somebody who must prove every 6 months that they are on their way out. Both are true at the same time. And that is why nearly every country is currently testing a different version of the same rule.
Now step back and look at the whole problem. Because it is bigger than one island, the entire world is trying to write the same law at the same moment. And nobody has got it right yet. Dozens of countries now run similar visas, each with a different name, all circling the same question the law does not know how to answer. What is a person who is physically here, economically there, and legally nowhere? The categories we use were designed for a world in which being somewhere and earning somewhere were the same act. Tourist, immigrant, worker, resident, all four assume it. When the internet split those two things apart, all four categories fell out of alignment. And what countries are doing now is patching the old category instead of inventing the fifth.
And there is a consequence still being written, which is what happens to the neighborhood itself. Somebody who knows they leave in 6 months rents rather than buys. They spend a lot and invest very little. They learn enough of the language for daily life and rarely much beyond it. They do not join residents' associations, do not vote in anything, do not fight about pavements. It is not a lack of goodwill. It is that their document is organized that way. And so the place receives a population with high purchasing power and shallow roots, which is exactly the combination that lifts rents without making neighborhood life any stronger. This is not a judgment about those people. It is a description of what a 6-month clock does to anybody's behavior.
And this is why this channel exists. We tend to think an immigration rule is a wall. Either you get in or you do not. But almost every modern rule is something else. It is a clock. It does not say whether you may be here. It says for how long and what happens when that time runs out. And a clock shapes the life of the person underneath it far more than a wall ever would. Notice that the previous episode ended on an island where the signs changed because a group stopped leaving. This one ends with the country answering that with a document which by design requires leaving. That is not a contradiction. It is the same question seen from both sides of the counter. And a clock leaves marks that a wall never would. A wall you either cross or you do not once. A clock you keep answering every few months for years until answering it quietly becomes the shape of the life itself.
So the question, and it applies to anywhere in the world you have ever considered living for a season, do you want to live there or do you want to stay there for a long time? Because those two sound identical and are treated completely differently by every country on Earth. Next time we leave the rule book and go back out to the street, how a neighborhood works out in practice that it has become a destination, and the first business that always changes hands when that happens.